Tell any of the companies in the building to evacuate now. There's gonna be a fire.
Okay, thanks.
Mrs. Parker is a retired school teacher who lives alone and is now involved in a charity organization. She is happy to have Clay as her tenant because he is always polite and kind. Clay, in turn, is grateful to Mrs. Parker for renting him the garage. After finishing his work, Mrs. Parker invites Clay to have dinner with her. While working on her laptop, she suddenly gets a virus notification warning her that her hard drive is infected. The notification advises her to contact a provided phone number if she wants to prevent permanent damage or data deletion without wasting any time. Mrs. Parker dials the provided phone number. Unfortunately, the number connects her to the headquarters of a criminal gang known for running phishing scams under the guise of an antivirus company. As Mrs. Parker makes the call, a team of hackers successfully breaches her computer, gaining remote control. They can easily trace some of her financial transactions carried out on the computer. Meanwhile, Mrs. Parker, who lacks knowledge about computer virus removal, seeks guidance from the manager. She's puzzled by the unusual things happening on her computer. Carney assures her that what she's witnessing is all part of their company's virus removal process. To apologize for any inconvenience, Garnett asks Mrs. Parker for her bank account information, promising compensation from their company. Without hesitation, Mrs. Parker shares her bank account details with Garnett and is surprised to receive $50,000 as compensation. However, Garnett later informs her that he was only authorized to send $500 and requests Mrs. Parker to return the excess money. Without thinking twice, Mrs. Parker accesses her bank account on the computer to return the money to Garnett. As she enters her password to complete the transaction, all her money vanishes instantly. Carney and his team have successfully hacked her bank account, leaving Mrs. Parker in a state of shock. She has lost not only her savings but also the funds belonging to the charity organization she manages. While Mrs. Parker is overwhelmed by the sudden theft, Clay is occupied with harvesting honey and pouring it into a glass jar. He plans to give the honey as a gift to Mrs. Parker. However, upon arriving at her house, he senses something amiss and cautiously grabs a knife from the kitchen for protection. When Clay entered the living room, he was met with a shocking sight. Mrs. Parker had tragically passed away, and a pistol lay on the floor beside her. At that very moment, an FBI agent named Fiona arrived, her weapon pointed at Clay. Verona believed that Clay had something to do with Mrs. Parker's death. Who, to make matters even more complicated, happened to be her mother. Fauna called the local police, who swiftly arrived, conducted a thorough investigation at Mrs. Parker's house, and took Clay to the police station for questioning. Despite her profound grief over her mother's loss, Verona was determined to uncover the truth behind the tragedy. Verona stumbled upon evidence that her mother had fallen victim to a criminal syndicate notorious for their phishing scams, resulting in the loss of all her mother's savings and the funds belonging to the charity organization. It became evident that her mother's death was not a homicide, with proof that Mrs. Parker had done the unthinkable. The police decided to release Clay. The following day, as Clay returned home, Verona came to offer her heartfelt apologies for wrongly accusing him of Mrs. Parker's death. She shared with him the details of her mother's passing and revealed the existence of a criminal syndicate posing as an antivirus company that had deceived her mother and stolen her bank account funds. Verona disclosed that this elusive criminal organization had been a fugitive from the FBI for years, and so far, they had managed to evade capture. Learning of this, Clay immediately contacted the Beekeepers and tasked them with tracking down the criminal syndicate. He was determined to seek justice for Mrs. Parker's tragic demise. Armed with all the resources and information available to them, the Beekeeper swiftly obtained information about the fraudulent antivirus company managed by Garnett and passed it on to Clay. Shortly thereafter, Clay made his way to the UDG headquarters with 2 jerry cans filled with gasoline. He incapacitated the security personnel upon reaching the control room. He confronted the employees. Clay intentionally attacked one of them and demanded that they pledge never to exploit vulnerable individuals like Mrs. Parker for financial gain. He then ordered them to vacate the room and proceeded to drench all the computer equipment with gasoline. Just as Garnett and his men arrived to confront Clay, he easily overpowered them. Clay rigged a bomb to detonate upon receiving a phone call and warned Garnett to flee if he valued his life. Moments later, a phone call came in, triggering a massive explosion that obliterated a significant portion of the building. Garnett quickly got in touch with his boss Danforth to relay the shocking incident. He explained that a man who identified himself as the Beekeeper had infiltrated their company, incapacitated their security personnel, and obliterated their headquarters. In response, Danforth ordered Garnett to hire some thugs and instructed them to eliminate Clay. Meanwhile, Verona, who had received news of the powerful explosion at the UG headquarters, felt a sense of satisfaction. The next day, Garrett and his hired thugs managed to track Clay's whereabouts while he was tending to his farm. As Clay left his farm, Garnett and his thugs destroyed the beehives and discreetly trailed him. It appeared that Clay was well aware of their pursuit and had prepared for a confrontation. Upon reaching his residence, Clay was attacked by Garnett and his gang. However, Clay adeptly defended himself, launching a counterattack that resulted in the deaths of the thugs. Clay intentionally spared Garnett, but severed his fingers as a stern lesson. Seizing the opportunity, Garnett managed to escape. At the same time, Verona conducted an interrogation with a UDG employee. She received news of a fire at her mother's residence. She rushed to Mrs. Parker's house and discovered that Clay's garage had been burned to ashes. To her surprise, she found an identification card from the UG company among them, the belongings of one of the bodies recovered from the fire scene. This discovery led Verona to suspect that Clay was directly involved in all the incidents related to the UG company. In the midst of these events, Garnett has escaped. Clay's clutches called Danforth to report the failure of the assassination plan and the loss of his fingers. Dan's anger flared, and he began questioning Clay's true identity. As they conversed, Clay suddenly appeared and launched an attack on Garnett.
Clay then bound Garnett's body with a lashing belt, securing it to the front bumper of his car, which he set in motion. The car rapidly pulled Garnett's body into the water. The entire incident was overheard by Danforth, who remained on the phone line. Realizing this, Clay picked up Garnett's cell phone and chillingly informed Dan of his impending arrival to settle the matter. Meanwhile, Fiona and her partner Matt made concerted efforts to find information about Clay in the United States government's databases, but encountered only dead ends. Verona concluded that Clay might be someone who had undergone specialized training within a secretive government organization, a revelation that even the FBI was unaware of. Shortly after Verona received information about Garnett, a high-ranking member of UDG was found drowned and tied to Clay's truck. Meanwhile, Danforth decided to meet with Wallace, a former head of the CIA who now oversaw his security, as per the request of his mother Jessica, the newly inaugurated President of the United States. Jessica specifically wanted Wallace to ensure her son's safety. Wallace took immediate action. He contacted the current CIA director Janet to inquire about Clay. Janet informed him that Clay had retired from the Beekeeper. Without hesitation, Wallace instructed Janet to eliminate Clay. Following his orders, Janet contacted the Beekeepers and tasked one of their operatives, Anna, with assassinating Clay. Meanwhile, Clay was at a gas station refueling. When he was suddenly ambushed by Anna, he managed to evade the attack and overpower Anna. He then severed her fingers and set her on fire, causing the gas station to erupt in flames to prevent further casualties. The Beekeepers informed the CIA that they would remain neutral and not pursue Clay. Any further, Janet relayed this message to Wallace, indicating that both the CIA and the Beekeepers would stay out of the feud between Clay and Danforth. With this information, Wallace had no choice but to take matters into his own hands. To eliminate Clay, he assembled a team of Special Forces members and disclosed the Beekeeper's existence to them. He portrayed Clay as a rogue agent whose actions posed a significant threat to innocent civilians, thereby convincing the Special Forces that Clay needed to be eliminated. The next day, Verona and Matt arrived at the charred gas station and discovered Anna's unidentifiable body. It seemed that Anna was part of a secret government organization, but Verona didn't know why she had been hunting Clay. Meanwhile, Clay used Anna's severed finger to infiltrate her residence and access her computer. He used the computer to track the signal from Garnett's phone, pinpointing Danforth's location at the 9-point building armed. With this knowledge, Clay gathered weapons and explosives from Anna's place and departed. Meanwhile, the Special Forces under Wallace's command tasked with eliminating Clay had already reached the 9-point building. Outside, the FBI SWAT team was stationed, well aware that Clay would strike the building. Surprisingly, Wallace and his Special Forces allowed the employees inside the building to continue working as if nothing was amiss. The NSU company occupying the building was part of a criminal syndicate involved in phishing scams. Before long, Clay arrived, catching the SWAT team off guard as they planned outside. Without wasting any time, Clay launched an attack on the SWAT team, overpowering them with ease. After dealing with the SWAT team, Clay infiltrated the building and cleverly blended in with the NSU employees. However, one of the Special Forces members eventually recognized him and initiated an attack. Wallace's Special Forces swiftly joined in, launching an assault on Clay, but Clay skillfully evaded their attacks, taking them out one by one until none remained. Following this, Clay interrogated Rico, one of NSU's executives, pressing him to reveal the identity of the company's owner. Initially resistant, Rico shared that the company's owner wielded immense power seemingly immune to the law in response. Clay asserted that nothing was beyond his reach and pledged to dismantle this ultimate power if it jeopardized innocent lives. Fearing for his life, Rico reluctantly disclosed his boss's identity. However, at that moment, Fiona and her team arrived with weapons drawn and aimed at Clay. Thankfully, Clay managed to escape. Meanwhile, Verona and her partner finally unraveled the truth that the owner of both the NSU and UDG companies engaged in phishing scams was Danforth, the son of the President of the United States. These companies fell under Danforth Enterprises, a firm owned by the Danforth family, which managed software is used by various U.S. government agencies. Verona also emphasized that Clay might not only target Danforth, but could also pose a threat to the President of the United States. Jessica happened to be Danforth's mother. Upon learning this, the deputy director pre-assigned Verona and Matt to apprehend Clay. The next day, Verona and her partner joined Secret Service agents to provide security for the U.S. president and her son, who was hosting a charity event at their beachfront mansion. Despite the heightened security with Secret Service and FBI personnel, Wallace remained worried about Danforth's safety. He hired a group of mercenaries led by Lazarus, who claimed to have taken down a beekeeper in the past, even though he had lost one of his legs in the process. Clay successfully infiltrated the Danforth family's estate by sneaking through a drainage channel and hiding under a truck. This allowed him to enter the mansion without raising suspicion, blending in with the charity event attendees. Meanwhile, PR met with the president and laid out all the details, including Dan's use of software from Danforth Enterprises and the creation of multiple companies for phishing scams. Verona, realizing Clay's presence, ordered the SWAT team to capture him, sensing he was surrounded and at gunpoint. Clay decided to kneel, but this was all part of his plan. He detonated all the Secret Service trucks as a diversion. Quickly dispatching those who had cornered him, charged into the mansion to confront Danforth. Inside the mansion, Jessica, upon discovering the extent of her son's wrongdoing, decides to expose Danforth's actions to Clay and the world, hoping for mercy. Simultaneously, Clay fought his way through the building. Clay reached the hallway leading to the president's office. He engaged in a brutal fight with Lazarus and emerged victorious, proceeding towards the president's office. However, when he tries to enter the room, Wallace confronts him. Clay instead broke his fingers in the president's office. Danforth, growing desperate as his mother prepared to unveil his crimes, took drastic action, grabbing a pistol and fatally shooting Pre in the midst of it all. Clay planted an explosive device on the door. He rushed into the room swiftly, followed by Verona and other FBI agents. Danforth was caught off guard, panicked, and took his mother, Jessica, hostage. Verona attempted to convince Clay not to harm Jessica or her son. In this tense moment, Clay turned to Verona and asked her whether she was working to enforce the law or to seek justice, witnessing Danforth's intent to harm his mother. He shot and killed Danforth. Before swiftly escaping through a window, Verona had a clear shot at Clay, but chose to let him go, prioritizing justice for her mother and the other victims over strict adherence to the law. Clay managing to flee the mansion equipped with scuba gear. He had hidden on the beach.
Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.